Well, hello everyone. We've got the regular podcast that goes out after African Energy is published, and issue 451 went out. It was a full issue and it was filled with stories. Nigeria was a big focus, but then so it should be. It's the continent's largest country. We also had quite a couple of very interesting looks at governance issues, particularly in Kenya. And we started the enlargement of our coverage of what we call transition minerals, that is, those minerals that are essential to the energy transition, but also that are going to play a very large part in some economies, such as Democratic Republic of Congo, as they go ahead. Minerals such as lithium, cobalt, magnesium, zinc, nickel, and the rare earth elements. It's a learning curve for all of us at African Energy, but that's the way we like to do it. So we started on Nigeria, and on the call I have James Gavin, upstream editor, and Jon Marks, power editor, and both in your own ways covered African issues, Nigerian issues indeed. Who'd like to start? I mean, part of the theme of the coverage we had is that looking forward to elections in 2023, the political class is again going to be obsessed with domestic politics and power broking, but there are both real positives and negatives happening in the wider economy and polity that are very worrying. In the economy, clearly there remain major problems linked around currency and many other issues, despite the spike this year in the oil price. In the polity, we're talking about a country that is significantly divided, with conflicts in the northeast, in the northwest, in the southeast, and communal problems. We illustrated that, subscribers will know, with another great map juxtaposing recent conflict issues with the infrastructure. But on the other hand, there was also some upside to be seen. And that upside comes from changes in key sectors such as electricity supply that have been making progress. So possibly, let's start. Perhaps a couple of questions for James. From what you've been seeing, the Petroleum Industry Bill is now the Petroleum Industry Act. Mm-hmm. The industry is not necessarily as excited as one might have thought, but how is the upstream industry looking in Nigeria as far as you see it?
I suppose it depends on where you're looking at it from. I mean, there will be different views. There seems, I would say, one consensus theme is there are some incentives. It's better than it was, but more could have been done. But I guess if one of the aims of the PIA, or PIB is now known as the PIA, was to create that more level playing field between IOCs and sort of perhaps more locally resident independents, then I suppose there is something going on here. I mean, we saw Seplat Energy, which is perhaps one of the largest sort of non-state indigenous oil companies in Nigeria. So they announced that they were looking to acquire some of ExxonMobil's shallow water assets. Nothing much beyond that, but that would seem to suggest that perhaps there is something that is leveling that playing field and incentivizing them to step up to the plate. However, there are always caveats, and it seems as though there's a little question mark here about NNPC's role, the state-owned Nigerian National Petroleum Company. Seems as though there's speculation at least that they're possibly looking to preempt. So, they might sort of step in there. We know their finances are not in the best shape. So are are they really able to come up with the cash that Exxon would be looking for? That's a bit of a question mark. But so there's a bit to play for there. There's also other independents in the running. We're hearing in dispatches that Trident Energy might be also being sort of looked at as a potential partner there. Then there's another local group, a relatively newish one, Chapel. And we also hear that the former Cairn Energy, now known as Capricorn, is also sort of sniffing around. So a bit of activity. But again, you do hear these qualms that the incentives on offer are somewhat lacking. We also heard that there's talk about the new natural gas, so domestic gas price, perhaps not set as high as oil companies would like to make it commercial. So still a lot to play for. I suppose one other aspect of finishing here, the sort of more political element of this in terms of the balance between the north and the delta. There's obviously an aspect of the PIA in which resources are sort of looking to be shifted further north, opening up frontier plays there. It's all a little murky though, and some risking annoying some of the people in the delta, seeing the resource shift away from them towards areas where well-placed political leaders might be positioned. So yeah.
Nigerian leaders have always, or many of them, particularly of the northern variety, have always looked for exploration, and that Providence will provide an oil find or gas up north. And indeed, that is an issue. Providence hasn't been kind to the Nigerian electricity supply industry either, but I think, as Dan, you've been looking, there is some movement, and the industry is looking a little bit better. And of course, there's also seems to be quite a boom going on in the commercial industrial market for Nigeria as well, which isn't surprising given the size of the economy and the lack of energy getting to industrial companies.
Yes, I think perhaps for the first time in covering Nigeria or the power sector for about 10 years, you might say Nigeria is perhaps entering the foothills of the sunlit uplands. But it does remain to be seen whether they will make it up the treacherous slopes. I think talk about collections reaching an average of 70% and reductions in the subsidy down about 10% of what they were a couple of years ago has really kind of changed the narrative a little bit from the government perspective. I think from industry, the private sector, the attitudes haven't changed that much yet, although people remain believers and remain there waiting to invest. But I think from the government perspective, something seems to have changed, and certainly the view you get from Nigerian officials going around industry conferences is that, you know, the government is now ready to move on to a kind of next phase, whether that's starting to offer potential, you know, put call option agreements, the guarantees that have been lacking for the solar plants, which they're talking about potentially revisiting next year. There's the 14 PPAs signed with solar plants back in 2016. So they're now talking about revisiting those, the government having space potentially, you know, there being sufficient liquidity in the sector for them to offer guarantees without worrying too much that they will end up paying most of that guarantee themselves, which is why they refused to give them in the first place. Obviously, it remains to be seen what kind of price they would consider acceptable. From the private sector side, there seems to be some give, but not an enormous amount, with people having sunk a lot of development costs into those projects. And at the same time, the regulator wants to move on to direct sales to discos, so direct bilateral sales from generation companies to distribution companies next year, or at least to start a gradual process and set out the rules for that next year, which will make an interesting dynamic in the market, which already has had a lot of innovations from the regulator around integrated mini grids and franchises. This has interesting opportunities potentially for solar, where the transmission system can only absorb about 1 gigawatt of solar, but distribution system might absorb up to 3 gigawatts. So if you can bilaterally contract, you might go to one of the more solvent distribution companies and place the solar system on their grid without having to go across the network. So there's quite a lot of interesting dynamics going on, and you can see how there might be a positive way forwards yet for a sector that has been troubled for so long by the fact that I think they've changed the direction that they're looking at the sector. Previously, people have looked to solve generation and then move transmission to distribution. This time, they've been working very hard to resolve distribution. That will filter through to transmission, and it may even resolve some of the problems around generation and gas supply as well. So it is an interesting position that Nigeria is in, and hopefully the macroeconomic environment allows progress to be made.
Great. Well, it's certainly good to hear amidst all the problems. And as I said before, you only have to look at that map to see the extent of the problems that are being faced. But it is great to see there are developments underway. And I think across the continent, we're in a period of great transition. Here in the UK today, of course, there's been quite some debate as to whether the British government should have stopped flights from Nigeria to try and stem the Omicron COVID, with the Nigerian High Commissioner making an impassioned and strong argument to say, well, possibly this shouldn't be the case, as we haven't actually got it in great quantities. Omicron clearly produces more problems right the way across the energy industries of Africa. We had a short feature updating that, and we'll certainly be looking to see how it impacts on people and projects. Elsewhere in the book, we covered power projects as ever, all the way across the continent, and some upstream. Interesting that Mozambique's going for another licensing round. Total's finally spudded its Venus 9 well in Namibia. People are trying to do things as the reality of the transition happens. And possibly, as I mentioned at the beginning, and we'll end on this podcast, the issue of transition minerals, how difficult they are to get out of the ground, what a different industry it might be, and the challenges that they produce from actual obtaining minerals, from how they're used in industry, to the governance issues that we know. And in issue 452, coming up very soon, we'll be looking at cobalt in Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, and amongst the many other issues that make up the firmament of African energy. So from now, thanks to James, thanks to Dan, thanks to Harry Randle-Marsh for putting this together, and we will literally talk to you soon. Bye-bye.